The general theme is, of course, the book of Leviticus, and much of Exodus is about the holiness of God. And that's what we're talking about here. The growth, our growing in holiness, is going to come by God unveiling His holiness, and that's what we're looking for. And last week it was about recognizing God in our lives, and that relates to His holiness, but it also then, as a result of that, we should be growing in that as well, because we want to be more like Him. And the only way to be more holy is to be more like God. That's the only way we can be holy. We can be different, but we would be different just for the sake of being different. That's not holiness, but holiness is definitely something related to uniqueness and a difference in the world. And so that's what we're focusing on here, and that relates to standing firm in the presence of God, staying firm in Christ's presence, and pursuing God. As we pursue God, this is how we do that. We're standing firm and we're growing in holiness. And then that relates, of course, to the big picture of finding our footing. The things and the activities that we have, opportunities we have in the community, can only be realized when we recognize the difference that we can make and the difference that God would make in the lives of other people. So that's how we can, that's how we can be motivated and also encouraged to continue, because it's always exciting when you do things, new things, at least it is for me. And so I love to start things, but when after a while it becomes work. And then you get a test on whether it is actually important or not, right? Because you have to decide from then, am I going to prioritize this or not? And when the fun stops and it becomes difficult work, then we have to remind ourselves what's important, and recognizing God's holiness and God's presence and how He's acted in our lives and how we can be a tool to be used for Him to be active in other people's lives is a great motivation for us. So if we put a little faith in there. All right, let's go ahead and have a prayer so we can get started. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the opportunities of life. Thank you for the opportunity tonight to come together, to look into your word and think about the applications and think about what you did through them, and help us, Lord, to recognize our place in this world, our place in the kingdom, and our responsibilities. As we go through, Father, we pray that you'll help us to find comfort and find relief in the challenges and problems of this world, by looking to you and trusting in you and your providence and your grace. Please help those of our number who are sick, who are hurting, who are having difficulties, all kinds of things going on in the congregation. We pray, Lord, that you'll bless them all and help them. Help us to be an encouragement to them as we can, and that you will be glorified by the way we behave ourselves. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Okay, so God's holiness is shown through detailed instructions for constructing a tabernacle, which is his dwelling place. And then he gave instructions for how to approach him with the sacrificial offerings. And as the Israelites follow these instructions, they grow in understanding God's holiness. So the more they understand, the more they do in relationship to what God said, the more they understand his holiness, and they can see a difference in him and in anything else that is the world. So in the world, so they can see that, and that is supposed to be a catalyst to help them grow into a better understanding of who God is. Sometimes, though, as with things that we do that we regularly are a part of, we often make them kind of a checklist, right? We just want to get it over with, so we go do it, and we kind of lose the meaning behind it if we're not careful. And it's pretty obvious that by the time Jesus came along, that was a pretty big problem, that they'd lost a lot of the meaning of God's intentions and replaced it with their own sense of what is important and the meaning that they had. Okay, so we went through and talked about Exodus 25 through Leviticus chapter 2. And one of the last questions we were on was, how do the sacrificial offerings provide a means for God to dwell among his people? That's a good place to start. How did that provide a way for God to stay with his people? Okay, it helped them to remember their sins. Yeah, that's true. That's a good place to start. What was the purpose of the sacrifices? Yeah, so they could be forgiven, right? And why was that necessary for God to dwell with them? Because of His holiness, right? Remember last week we even got into a little bit about the temple and the tabernacle, and what was on top of, what do they call that on top of the what is that called? The Ark of the Covenant, mercy seat. They also was where where His throne was, and is in between the two cherubim, right? So this is where God pronounces His judgments. This is where also the mercy seat, which related to the sprinkling of the blood and other things related to that. What was the purpose of cherubim, at least in symbol? Protect God's holiness. Not that He needed the protection, but it's really a protection for people. So there's layer upon layer upon layer. And God designed this, and it was symbolic, but it also had meaning beyond just a symbol. And we actually have physical symbols that were important and literally kept people out, right? And the law provided for keeping people away. It started with the mountain, right? With Mount Sinai. Who was allowed to go there? Nobody. Well, there were a few, right? But everyone was prohibited. But then we have the 70 elders that went a little ways up, and then Moses went up, and evidently Joshua went up a little ways, and it doesn't really say how far he went up, but we know that when Moses was coming down, he was having a conversation with Joshua. So there was some measure there that he went, and it could have been with him the whole time. We don't know. And then when he built the tabernacle, we had this same thing. We have the outer part of the tabernacle. We have the inner part of the tabernacle where the priests could go, and that's where they made the sacrifices. And the fathers of the families would come and offer sacrifices for the sins, and they would cut the neck of the goat or whatever it was they're sacrificing, and the Levites the priests would take it and cut it up and do everything they were supposed to do for the law, and burn it, and several things that they had to do. Sometimes they kept part of it depending on the kind of sacrifices that were made. But anyway, it's all showing God's holiness and that we approach God, but it's in stages, and it's only up to a certain degree that most people could ever approach Him because of sin. And it illustrated that. So, on His terms, how did these sacrificial offerings teach about approaching God, or what did it teach about approaching God? I think you just answered it. It's on His terms, and it's always been that way. From the very beginning, it's always been that way. So, all right, number 5. As the construction of the tabernacle was completed in Exodus 40, what is significant about God filling the dwelling place? How did He fill the dwelling place, first of all? What did He fill it with? Yes. Yeah. So a cloud, nobody could enter, couldn't see anything. And how did that was a representation of God coming to this place, right? And what's significant about that cloud being there? What did it remind them of? Or what would it say? Yes, He was bringing them out of Egypt with that. He was leading them through. Mm-hmm. So it would signify protection, and it would also signify, that signified God, right? And so God, would it say that it's showing approval for what was created and what they'd set up? Of course it would. So now we have this. They made it, by the way, and they brought all the pieces together and showed them to Moses. And Moses, what did Moses do with them? Do you remember? I'm not talking about the sprinkling of the blood. What did he do when they brought him the pieces of the tabernacle? He checked it all out and made sure that it was exactly to specifications. And then he had them assemble it. And after he assembled it, God came and rested in that place. So there's a lot of symbolism going on, but it illustrates the holiness and the preciseness of God, which I think is really important for us. And it shows that God shows his holiness in so many different ways. A lot of us sometimes, I say us, humans, we like the idea of being holy, but we don't like the implications of what it means for God to be holy. Because generally speaking, in the religious world, when people think about the holiness of God, all I have to do is just be around him and I'm holy too. That's a far cry from what actually the Bible teaches. You don't just hang around God. You don't have access to God, period. But he can arrange for you to have the ability to come to him, which he did, thankfully, and he does through Jesus. But even then, we can't just decide willy-nilly that I'm gonna go hang out with God today. That's not how it works. And why is that? Because God is holy. And he's more holy than we are. The only way we can have any claim of holiness is because we're like him, because he's made us to be like him. That's the only way we can say we're holy. And of course, we have a part in that process. He doesn't do everything for us, but that is the basis for how we come to him, is we have to learn to become holy. And so 3 different times in the book of Leviticus, he says, "Be holy, for I am holy." And then Peter picks that up in 2 Peter also, "Be holy, for I am holy." All right, so number 6, in what ways does God demonstrate his patience in unveiling details about approaching and dwelling with him? How does that show his patience? Sorry? Reverence? Well, it shows our reverence, yeah, for sure, that we have to come to him on his terms and recognize that he's greater than us. Okay, so he made sure that we had all the details that we needed. That was one way that he was doing that. Right. Yes. Oh, yeah, and it would have taken them a lot of time. So, yeah. Do you know how long they were at Mount Sinai before they left? They were there a full year. In fact, to the day, they were there for a year, and that's when they were assembling everything, putting it all together. So it took time. It also, to me, it relates to, it shows patience, because God is, I think patience is not only just waiting, but also he's stuck with it, right? He gave them so much detail, and the only reason he did that was so that they could approach him. He didn't have to do any of those things, but he did it because he knew that in order for the Messiah to come, these things had to take place, and there had to be some way that we can say that God is here with us on the earth, because there isn't any other way that would have happened. He wouldn't have just showed up, right? Although we recognize God is everywhere, but at the same time, he's not in some ways. And he also couldn't, because of his holiness, he couldn't make it look like he's just accepting anything, right? He can't make it, he's just accepting of whatever. He has to show that he's holy and have that recognition there. So I think that relates to that somewhat too. Any other thoughts? Mm-hmm. Continues to unfold. This was like the first
step of that unveiling, just a small, but yet so detailed in it.
Right, yeah, and it is pretty amazing. This wasn't Moses sitting down saying, I think I'm going to throw together some ideas, right? This is God specifically saying, this is what I expect, I want to see. And so here's a thought question. The way God shows his patience in unveiling details also relates to how long it took to unveil, to show the details, the process that it had to go through. Does that say anything for us and how we should imitate? Should we imitate that? How or why? Either one. How would you answer that? Okay, so it could relate to how we do what he requires of us so that we are thoughtful and we do it, okay, and even pay attention to details. I think that's an important idea. A lot of us, we don't like details. To a certain degree we do, but, let's be honest. It's difficult reading through the book of Leviticus because of all the detail. We get bogged down in the details, and that's why the book of Revelation is difficult. Lots of passages. Do we have any details given to us in the New Testament? Yeah. Not nearly like this. I mean, he doesn't really care what this building looks like, but we have a lot of detail about how we should be arranging our own lives, which is the temple of God. The church is the temple. And so, yeah, that's a good thought. Any other thoughts?
God has always been very intentional with how he should be approached, and the pattern was set in the Old Testament, and it follows through in the New Testament. And so to me, people who today think that they can just do anything they decide to do and say they're doing it for the Lord, and then he should just be happy that they're doing it.
Yeah, you should be happy that I'm doing something, right?
His requests are very intentional, and so our worship and preparation should be just as intentional.
All right, good. So we need to be intentional in what we do and make sure that our intentions are what he expects. All right, good. I actually thought about this completely opposite when I was going through it. Y'all, that's some great stuff. Maybe I thought about it wrong, but I was thinking about it. Do we have any obligation to? Now I want to be careful how I say this. The people in the world, do we have any responsibility for maintaining holiness related to the people in the world? Yeah, so what would it look like for us to be in the world but not letting the world be the same as us? Okay, so we have to behave differently. Do we? So let's balance this. When I ask this, I'm not looking for a yes for sure, even though it might sound like it. But should we be the kind of people who will distance ourselves from people who are sinners? To an extent. Why? Influence. Yeah, so we struggle with this, right? Jesus prayed in John 17 that his disciples would be in the world but not of the world. And so that's why we don't go off and build a convent somewhere, which would be kind of nice. Wouldn't it be kind of nice if we just all had the ability to go out and farm and we just all spend all of our time together and, it would become a cult. But there are some that did that, right? So there's monasteries and things like that. Why did they do that? They're trying to get out of the world because they're showing holiness. Okay, I get that. I understand that. But at the same time, Paul said, he also said in 1 Corinthians 15:33 that evil company corrupts good morals. So there is a danger when we're among other people that will be corrupted. And we have to recognize that. But at the same time, we don't want to go too far, right? We have to have a balance. And I don't know how to draw the line, honestly. Sometimes we talk about, what about in fellowship? What about in fellowship like in worship? Does that apply? Can you imagine if the people in, let's say in the first century, the priests got together with the priests in Samaria, And they said, let's just worship God together. What do you think would have happened? Not pretty. Why? Right. So they're violating what. If you participate with someone else doing it, you're doing it together. Your intention is to worship together. And they're doing something wrong, but you're not. Are you doing anything wrong? Yes, you are. You're participating. And this is one of the reasons Paul talks about this. This is one of the problems that they had with, for example, the idols and the eating the food. Ultimately, he said, idols mean nothing. Also, if you're in the marketplace, he said, don't even ask. It doesn't matter. But if they come to you and they serve you food and they say, I offered this to my God, would you eat in celebration with us? You cannot say it. No. Yeah, right. And so there's influence that happens there, and we're not necessarily guarding our holiness. We're guarding, so to speak, God's holiness. And where He has dictated how we should approach Him, we can't just decide to do it however we want. And that's a problem. Now, there's difficulties there because, if you're out with a friend and he's not really a Christian. I was in a situation the other night. I was sitting down talking to two people, and they were not Christians. They claimed, they even said, I'm not Christian, but they wanted to pray. Well, what happens if I pray? No big deal. What happens if I listen to the other man pray? I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, no, you make sure you dot all your I's and cross your T's, right? So there is some degree that we have to recognize we're going to have to interact with people, and there's going to be some situations we get in that may not be comfortable, but that's a big difference than saying, hey, you think you're doing right, I think I'm doing right, let's just agree to disagree and do the same. Let's just participate, and you do it however you want to. There's a big difference in those, to me. How do you draw the line, though? Any thoughts?
You were meeting with those two men with an eye toward developing and working toward studying with them. And so that's different than.
Yeah, it could still get you into trouble, though, if you're not careful. Yeah. Gotta be careful. And if it's according to His will, yeah, that's true. And so there's some gray areas here. I say gray, not that there's not an answer, but I don't know how to answer it sometimes. Yeah, that would be a special thing. Yeah.
You have to allow some of their ignorance in order to be able to get to the root of who they are and where to start.
Yeah, I agreed.
Start building from somewhere.
You got to build from somewhere. Yes.
And the difference would be, you don't come in and say, oh, well, you need a prayer for us, we want to pray, because they acknowledge they claim to be a Christian. If there's opportunity to say, well, we want to pray for dinner, you can speak of it.
Right. So, it's a circumstance, right? And sometimes, you don't want to be that kind of person. It's like, no, you have to do it my way right now. No, we can't do that. But that doesn't mean that we can't ever err in that context, right? So we have to kind of be aware and work through it ourselves the best that we can. I deal with this a lot because every time I go to a new town, which I hope never do again, I always run into what they call the ministerial alliance, right? And except for here, they always want you to be a part of it. They don't want anything to do with me here. I don't know what Brian did to them before, but I actually sought them out to try to meet them, to get to know them, not to be part of the alliance, but to get to know them, right? And they wouldn't even return my phone call. So at the same time, though, to be fair, there was like 3 or 4 pastors in the area that left when I came. So they had a lot of turnover and stuff. It was in turmoil, actually. I don't know if you knew that, but the churches in this area were in turmoil. Most of them were when I came. Anyway, so I struggle with that because I don't want to be dismissive. I don't want to say that you're worthless. I don't want anything like that. But it's obvious that we don't believe the same way. None of the churches believe. the same way. If they believed the same way, they wouldn't be meeting in different places. I mean, that's obvious. And some people will look at that and go, well, it doesn't matter what they believe. We'll just participate. And there's others, and we're not the only ones. They'll hold themselves back and say, I don't agree with that. I can't participate in it. And they can do that nicely, but they still have to do it, right? So I get that all the time. I really do. Yeah, Paul?
I think we need to keep in mind that most associations work both ways. You have to protect yourself
Yeah.
by influencing other people. But it's very easy to go too far in a relationship if you don't have any barriers.
Yeah, you're right. So we have to put up the barriers. We have to recognize who we are, who they are, and the situation, and do the best that we can to show love and to accept them as much as we can, but to recognize that there is a difference, and we have to maintain that. Yeah.
Typically, whenever Ted and I were planning out, see a couple, right before they eat, typically I'll go up to them and thank them for their exercise.
Yeah. Well, I ran into that the other day where somebody was coming. They told me they were having Bible study at their house, and my response was, "It's always good when we study the Bible. It's always good. You try to encourage what's good, right? So we have to be careful. But anyway, the reason we have to be careful is not because we're special or unique. It's because God is holy, and we cannot violate His ideas and ideals just because we want to get along with other people better. So when we cross that line, we're in trouble. But that doesn't mean that we always know where that line is. So we have to be careful and delve into it with wisdom and patience, right? Okay. Any other thoughts?
And looking at this, I see everything that you're saying. I'm part of the comment, obviously. So, in my opinion, he's given all the intricate details. This is not what you do it. Be intentional. In other words, do what I tell you, do what I command you.
Yeah.
I see all of that. And I mean, the flip side of this, if I'm looking at the patience piece, look at what the Israelites just did, and all the times they failed, and woe is me, and now I want something else, and now I'm doing the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Moses up on the mountain, but I make him a thick cat. To me, it's also teaching them patience for something about faith, or something like God.
Yeah.
It's going to take time.
Right.
So that you remember me. And then the part of the cloud being there is, remember God, I'm with you. Stop forgetting. I'm not here.
Yeah.
Maybe because they needed it more at that point than we all could, but is that symbolic because of their history? Is he showing, okay, I'm here, that's one of the times there, you know that's not the place, you know that's not him.
They saw him all the time. Yeah. And I think that's a lesson for us, that we need to intentionally seek out and see, okay, where's God in my life right now? How is He acting? What is He doing? And look for opportunities, right? So, yeah, and we all know that most of the time, most people in the religious world, in Christianity, most of what they believe, we also believe. There's a small amount that doesn't overlap, right? And the small amount, unfortunately, sometimes are the most important things. And if we can't agree on the most important things, we're in danger of hurting ourselves, and we're in danger of compromising ourselves. And we don't want to do that. And we don't want to do that to them either, because we're hurting our ability to reach them. It's difficult for us to do things together and give full assent to them doing these things, and then later on come back and say, well, technically you shouldn't be doing that. Well, what does that mean to them then? Well, if I shouldn't have been doing it, why'd you do it with me, right? It teaches them a lesson, and we got to be careful with the lessons too. Yeah, Joe?
Interjection, I guess, in my old age, I come to really appreciate Wendell Winkler in his latter years. He liked to, when you talk to someone, he'd say, well, he said, don't listen in the Church of Christ. We may not be the only Christians, but we are most certainly Christians only. And then he'd go to Scripture to show why we are Christians only.
Well, and that's an important distinction. That, yeah, I think that we can stop there. But,
I have a question. I know two different towns to help the needy, to have a central location. In another town, the Church of Christ will not participate with other churches.
Mm-hmm.
What is the distinction there? And what should it be?
That sounds like an elder's problem. Both sides of the story are, one, we don't want to participate with people that are doing things that are wrong. So we want to pull back. And sometimes, in my opinion, this is a matter of opinion, we pull back a little too much. On the other hand, what I've seen other people do is we're just going to give full assent to, hey, let's just all get together and work together. And the idea is that we're working on something that we all can agree on. I don't have as much of a problem with that. Maybe as much as I should, but I don't have much of a problem with that. The issue becomes, generally speaking, while we're doing these things, they're also wanting to add to it and do other things in the process so that we're actually helping them develop and grow their own churches. Because most, and I say that about churches of Christ too, most benevolent work is done just so we can get other members. That's why we do it. It's not because we are just being benevolent. It's because we expect something in return. And that's, to me, I don't think we're doing that here, but to me, that's not the appropriate reason that you do benevolent work. If it happens that way, that's what we want, but it's not the reason. So we do benevolent work with them. They're looking for the same thing, though. We're looking to try to convert people to come here, and they're looking to get people to go there. And so I can see why where you'd come down would be how you want to look at it, I guess.
Not for discussion now, but she deals on one of the major things that concerns me, the Church of Christ says.
Yeah.
What the Bible says.
Right.
It's what the Church of Christ says, and we put ourselves in it.
Agreed. It's not what the Church of Christ says. Yeah, 100% agree with that. And it gets dangerous because we know that other congregations, not only do we have politics, right? So any of the denominational world has this, but we have it too. So we have politics where there are things. So for example, I go to Brown Trail and I teach once a week, and I've got a few more weeks of that this quarter, and I am very careful what I say because I know it's just that far and that quick before I'm written up in all kinds of different places because somebody misquoted me or said something wrong about me because they're trying to keep. There's some legitimacy that we need to kind of police ourselves, but at the same time, sometimes we go way overboard with that, and we start creating our own dogma related to matters of opinion, and that's when we have to be careful, for sure. And, well, like you said, let's not get into that too much, but I agree. Okay, let's see. These are, incidentally, I don't mind talking about this because it definitely relates to God's holiness. And we don't want to go too far either way. So, number 7, as God's glory filled the finished tabernacle, how do you think this affected the Israelites related to reverence? Yeah. Yeah, so to me, it's like when they approached Sinai. Sinai was earthquakes and all kinds of stuff going on. And was that really necessary? I mean, it wasn't necessary for God for him to come. It's not like God is so heavy that when he landed on the mountain, things just shattered and shook. And that's not the idea. The idea is we have a God who is powerful and mighty, and this is a message to the people who approached. Don't approach, right? So, yeah, God is, especially in the Old Testament, is very visual. Why is that? That's how we respond. I mean, there's a reason why people would bow down to an idol. It's not because it's ignorance. But it's not a low IQ that causes that. Whenever I was a child, I went to, it was at the Cotton Bowl. We went on a field trip to see the Egyptian, I think it was King Tut, if I remember right. And I remember walking around and things, and I was so fascinated, and you just look at all these different things, and it was just all this gold, and it's pretty, and I was, wow, it was cool. And then I came around this corner, and there's this statue, and it, in my mind, it was 60 feet tall. This person was sitting down on a chair, and I felt like I wouldn't even go up to the top of its toe. That's how big it was. It wasn't that big, but it felt like that. And I remember thinking, wow, that's incredible. And if you live in a culture where your parents come to you and say, yeah, you know how you feel about that? You need to bow down. It's easy to get there. And so, why am I saying that? Because we're visual, right? We don't have that in the New Testament, though, do we? What visual things do we have? We stay away from crosses because we don't want people to think that they're gods, right? I've actually seen people bow down to crosses before. Have you? I have. We don't do a lot of things, and that's a matter of opinion, but we don't have visual things. The only visual thing that we have is that table, right? Or if you're taking the cup and the bread, that's visual. Anything else visual? What do you think that implies? That we're in the spiritual realm, that God expects for us to have spiritual vision and not physical vision. I would think that. And can we see the power of God in the world around us? Only if we're spiritually discerning. And that's the point. We need to see, but we can't see without faith. Okay. How does the overflow of materials that Moses told them to stop giving, what does that show about the hearts of the Israelites at this point? They were very generous, yeah. What did you say? Excited? Yeah, we got this thing to be, yeah. What was you remember the last time that the Israelites gave gold and things? What did they do with it? They made a calf. So now they get to make a place for God to be. So they recognize a difference, I guess. I don't know. But they're excited for now. It won't be long till they're griping again. But let's see. What evidence should others be able to see in us that shows we have been affected by the presence of God in our lives? That's a really tough question. It's very broad, right? The answer is huge. We have to show that we're different, and we have to be the light. And Jesus taught those things that were the salt of the earth, were light of the world, and he did it intentionally vague. But there is specific answers that we all have to come up with for ourselves. Because if you ask me how I'm a light to the world, it's probably going to be a little bit different than how you are, because we're all different people, right? There's nothing. I mean, we might say in general terms, there are things that we all do. We go out and do good. We evangelize. But even that, those are very generic ideas that we have to define ourselves. And as Christians, our job, and I believe the job of the elders at helping us this, is to figure out, what am I supposed to be doing in this world? How am I supposed to act? What am I supposed to do? And we know, morally speaking, we put off the sins, of course, and we know those things. But those can be very specific too. So we put off those things in our own hearts. We cut them out because God's actually cutting them out by teaching us and refining us, but we're in the process of it. And then we also decide we're going to act in a certain way. And so going out and doing good may look different for us, because for you than for me, because you're going to have opportunities to do things I'll never even see, and vice versa. So which one is right? Yeah. Supposed to use what we have and work with that as best that we can. So what was Aaron's excuse for the golden calf? You remember? I threw it in the fire, threw the gold in the fire, and out popped this calf. I mean, literally, that's what he said, basically. So what does that say about human nature? And what does that say about us? We don't want to take responsibility. We're not as patient as we need to be. Yeah, the fact that he gave in, too, says a lot. And we have to be very strong to not give in to the crowds, right? And then, we're masters at coming up with excuses, right? I can give you every reason in the world why I did something wrong or why I didn't do something I should have done. I can give you 100 different reasons, but none of them matter, right? Did it really matter what Aaron's answer was? He still did it. Right. Okay. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. So as we grow and develop, we have to show people that, okay, you're trustworthy, people can come to you and talk to you, whatever, and they know that you're doing things out of sincerity, that kind of thing. All those things relate to that. So very good. All right, we got off through almost all of it, but thank you very much.